You are listening to the Wholesome Way podcast, hosted by Alexander Lobb. Please keep in mind, everything shared in this podcast is for inspiration only and shouldn't be taken as medical or professional health advice. If you're making changes to your health routines or lifestyle, please check in with our qualified health professional first. Before we jump in, I have a personal question to ask you. Do you ever feel like someone else is running your life and you never seem to have time for what you want to do? Are you at the mercy of the daily 9-to-5 grind, dreading Mondays, waiting to say happy Friday to colleagues, and thinking not long now until that Bali holiday? If that sounds like you, you're not alone, and there's a way around. The answer is lasting work-life balance. It's the key to all limitations and imbalances in life. It sounds simple, but have you ever actually defined what work-life balance means to you? I am now running a one-on-one coaching program to help overwhelmed full-time working men and women find a work-life balance that makes them feel in control, energized, and fulfilled in 90 days. And that's without giving up the things you love doing now. You might be saying, I don't need someone to coach me in my life. Well, not true. Think about it. Does a tennis player who wants to go pro like Novak Djokovic just pick up a racket and hit balls over the net all day alone? Does a singer who wants to become world class like Elvis Presley just sing to themselves in the mirror all day alone? No. They had a secret weapon, an amazing asset that guided them to unlocking their true potential, cultivating their growth, and skyrocketing them to success. They had a coach. If you want to boost your personal growth, advance your career, strengthen your relationships, unleash your inner creator, why not get a coach for that? If that's piqued your curiosity and you're smiling, nodding your head right now, click the link to my Calendly in the show notes below to book a call with me, and I'll show you how to create a life that feels balanced and fulfilling on your terms. And now, on with the episode. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Season 2 of the Wholesome Way podcast. I have the pleasure of speaking with Tim Kelly today, who's our guest, founder of Polytope Press and author of Natural Healing Self-Empowerment, a bold exploration into regenerative health, self-healing, and human potential. Tim's work focuses on restoring the body through scientifically backed natural methods alongside practical at-home fitness, alternative modes of health, and deep research into human history and evolution. He's also a frequent guest on health and author podcasts, challenging conventional thinking around what the human body is truly capable of, with the ultimate goal of building paradise on Earth, one block at a time. Tim, welcome to the Wholesome Way podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And Tim is joining us from America, and I am obviously based in Sydney. So it's amazing, always amazing to be able to connect with people over such vast distances. So I'm very, very grateful for that, Tim, and thank you for your time.
Well, of course, and this is one of the most important topics, and I think one of the things that's very interesting about the last several years is it seems as if humanity as a whole is just bonding together regardless of our location, and I think that's a great thing to see.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's so important to, as you said, to know that when we're really not that different, that across distances, across races, across ethnicities, cultures, we're all looking for, ultimately, we're looking for happiness, we're looking for health, and it's important to remind ourselves that we're all in this together and we have the same goals. And and when you first reached out to me, I loved the fact that you're into this, you're spreading such important knowledge around natural health. I was introduced to it at a very, very early age. I was very lucky enough for my mum to be into that. sort of thing, naturotherapy, homeopathy, and I was downing spirulina at the age of 5. So I was already had tasted all of these interesting and sometimes not nice tasting vitamins and minerals and all that. So it was very, I was very happy that you reached out and we could talk about this and get stuck into your book, Natural Natural Healing Self Empowerment. So Tim, take me back on sort of the journey on where this all started for you. What prompted you to begin this, I like to say, crusade into natural health and building paradise on Earth.
Okay, well, the paradise on Earth part is something that's been with me ever since I was a very little kid. I was always interested in optimal civilization, or what I sometimes would call paradise on Earth. I actually grew up in a religious household, although I ended up leaving religion when I was 17. I had an introspective period when I was 17 where I just sort of stopped interacting with the world and thought a great deal about who I was and who I wanted to be. And during that time period, I decided that I was not comfortable with religion, so I decided to leave it. But I remember hearing a lot when I was a kid about how when you die, you will go to paradise. So I just remember getting this quizzical expression on my face and thinking, what is wrong with having paradise now? Why do we have to die? And no one seemed to have a good answer for that question. So at the very least, I said to myself, okay, people may not seem to think that we can have a fantastic civilization while we're alive, but if we do enough research and put enough effort into it, surely there is some model of the best we can do while we're alive. And I'm interested in finding out what that is. So my focus was primarily initially more on things like fitness and technology in relation to an optimal civilization. I knew that I loved writing from the time I was a very little kid. So for a while, I was casting about through the different fictional genres to see which one I wanted to write in. And then when I was in 6th grade, an idea hit me very, very strongly that what I really wanted to do, after all the reading of fiction I had done up to that point, was to write a fictional saga about an interdisciplinary genius who designs and builds a paradise city against the full force opposition of hell. And I figured that in the course of writing that, I would come into encountering the most important ideas in the entire human experience. And what better way could there possibly be to fulfill all my potential than to negotiate the most important ideas in the human experience? So that was how a trajectory got started. But my focus on health really didn't occur until after a series of incidents that took place in my 20s. So when my fiction was getting challenged, basically there were a number of publishers who didn't seem to be interested in fiction about optimal civilization, which I found very, very strange. So I had to do some other things to survive for a while. And one of the things I ended up doing as a very unexpected tangent, even to myself, was creating a 3-dimensional periodic table of the elements. And there's a paper on that that's available at my website. You can read it for free. That's called The Beauty of the Atom. And after I created that theory, I thought, okay, great. Let me check with some other scientists around the world, see what they think. So I shared that information with scientists around the world, and I was hoping to get 30 to 40% support or something like that, because history shows that when you do something that's very new, extremely innovative, you usually don't get that much support. So I just reached out in chat rooms to astrophysicists and biochemists and whoever had a chance to review the work and said, what do you think of this? And I got about 95% support, which shocked me. I was not expecting to get that much support. And I thought, well, this is great. So then I thought, okay, let's get this published in a science journal then. And all the science journals had the same reaction. We have no interest whatsoever in even listening to what you have to say. And I said, okay, that's not what I was raised at, that science was all about. I was told that didn't matter what your background was. All that mattered was your evidence. And could you make a strong case? But apparently this was not the case. And I said, wait a minute, what exactly is the problem here? And then they said, well, your work has to be peer reviewed. And I said, well, that's fine. My peers are anybody who has graduated high school, because all you need is basic geometry and accepted knowledge from the world of physics, and you can verify this theory. And apparently that was not good enough. And so I said, okay, well, I've already gotten support from the rest of the scientific community. I have no idea what the object is that we're going for if we're going to turn away from work like this. So I got very frustrated and I started researching global corruption. And this eventually led me to a book called Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries, which, as it happens, was a collection of articles originally published in Nexus magazine, which is based in Australia. And so I read all of those articles, and there was a section of the book that was devoted to health information and health information that had been suppressed. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I have to check out and see whether or not this is true, because my main characters would use it if it was excellent information about health. So I researched each methodology that was presented in the book, and I found that everything that was presented in those articles was indeed correct. But I also found that many people who practice a methodology tend to stick with that methodology. So, for example, somebody has a problem and someone's an expert in oxygen therapy. Well, they want to use oxygen therapy to use that particular approach. And in my case, I was not interested in applying any one specific approach. I wanted to find out all the best approaches, stockpile all of them, and then share them with the world so that they could choose which one worked for them. And then the work evolved over time until eventually, when I got to my present status of having the health book in its third edition, I ended up creating a new paradigm or understanding of what health actually is and how to obtain it. And I put all of that into the third edition of the book, Natural Healing Self-Empowerment. So that's sort of a nutshell version.
Wow, incredible! It's such a fascinating journey. Yeah, and also from a young age as well. Like, talk to me a bit about, was that purely just out of your own curiosity, or was it environment? Like, what were your parents sort of into? Were they very much pushing you down that path as well of curiosity into health? And
No, not at all. It was a very intensely negative environment I grew up in. I was actually an adopted child. So my adoptive parents had no idea what I was supposed to be. No one else did either. And so, I just started doing a lot of strange things, and everyone was thinking, okay, why is he doing this? And maybe it was in his blood. And no one knew what to make of it. All I knew from the environment that I was being raised in was it was extremely important to worship appearance and be rich. And this was just not my thing. I could understand, the value of having a positive appearance in life, but my goal was to be happy. And I also wanted to fulfill my potential. If I got rich in the course of doing that, great, but it was not going to be a top priority. So a lot of people were extremely disappointed in me. And they all were just thinking, well, why would you not want to be rich? Or you have the ability to become so rich. Why not become rich? And I could see that a lot of people were either selling their souls or doing things that were actually not helping humanity or anyone for that matter. And I just began to be suspicious of how certain people were becoming rich. And I was determined, no, let's base our lives on love. We have to love what we're doing. I love a lot of things. I love writing. I love music. I love art. I love good science. I love good inventions. I'm going to do that and see where that gets me. So it was basically sheer defiance of my environment, which was very negative. So I think my adoptive parents had come from a negative environment, and it was like one chain generation after another, and it was probably just going to keep going on like that. How my own situation arose, but how everyone's situation arose. And it's basically comes down to, what kind of environment are we creating? And when you get to books like Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, published by Weston Price, he traveled all around the planet in 1939, who is the former head of the American Dental Association in the United States. And he was curious, what makes for healthy people? So instead of just consulting another lab experiment, he got his wife, got on ships, and he traveled all around the planet. Traveled to Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, South America, Peru, consulted spear throwing Africans looking for patterns. And it was all about environment. Do humans exist in harmony with the environment, or do they not? When they are in harmony with their environment, they're free of disease, they're happy, and they're healthy. And this is what I came to understand. My own personal situation is not that important, but if we get to a point where cultures all over the world are living in harmony with their own specific geographical terrain, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but the common denominator will be the happy, healthy societies are going to be existing in harmony with their local environment, their local plants, their local vegetables, their local fruits, because everything was designed to work in harmony. There's a video I saw not that long ago that was talking about a certain species of plant that can only germinate when it passes through the digestive tract of an elephant. I mean, these are the kinds of things that really let you know that humans and plants are meant to interact with each other, and that when everything's in its natural state, they do work together. The plants deliberately create fruits and vegetables to give humans the nutrients they need to thrive. And then when you move, like to a completely different continent, a completely different latitude, a completely different sun exposure level. So, for example, let's talk about the sun exposure for a moment. It's been found that some of darker skinned people, when they move into areas where there's less sunlight, they get cancer. Okay, so this is just another example of how everything is designed to be perfect in terms of an environment. There's not one definition of perfection. Perfection is defined by the geographical terrain. So a fish is not going to be an ultimate fish if it's on land. It's designed to be in water. A bird's not going to be an ultimate bird if it's under the ocean. Human beings are designed to be in specific territories with specific kinds of light, and their skin is related to the ambient light, and the nutrients that make them happy and healthy and thrive are going to be in that terrain. Just work with the terrain, don't work against it. So that's just sort of a general theme.
Mm, yeah, environment. Yeah, it makes sense. Time and time again, you can definitely feel it. Yeah, when the environment is pushing against you. I guess for people who know that they're in an environment that's not doing well for their health, like what would you say about that? Like how important would that be to, in terms of their ability, their finances, where their family is? How important is it to find an environment that's suitable for your health, or can you compromise a little bit and really focus on, you talk a lot about complete nutrition and balanced flow. Like how much are we talking here is in terms of importance is environment.
Well, environment, of course, is of great importance. And I think one of the main things to understand there is that you're not necessarily going to have absolute control over the environment, but you control what you can. And there are a number of things that you can control. Inside your house, you have lights that are lighting up your rooms. So you have the ability to control those light bulbs. You can start looking for things like full spectrum light. So there's a section of the book, you said you had only read the first half. So towards the second half, I mentioned solutions in relation to full spectrum light. So there was a pioneer, for example, whose name was John Ott, OTT. And there's a documentary that is linked to my book called Exploring the Spectrum. So one of the things that he showed in there was the relationship of healthy animals to ambient light. There are certain rats, for example, who, believe it or not, will not grow tails unless they're exposed to certain frequencies of light. In another part of that documentary, he showed a bunch of school children who were sequestered in a classroom and shut off from the light. They drew the blinds down. It was a strange wing of the building. And those kids ended up getting leukemia. And they got the leukemia partly, as was proven in his work, from the light sources. So the Appleton, Wisconsin the Appleton, Wisconsin school study is a very important landmark in this regard. So let's talk about that one for a second. So what happened in Appleton, Wisconsin? So there was a bunch of students who were all showing extreme forms of negative behavior. There was truancy, there was violence, there was teen pregnancy, there was low grades, suicide, just about everything that you could think of that would define a negative environment. So what some folks did who understood the way life worked was they went in and they changed out the vending machines. They got rid of all the junk food, all the refined sugar, all the processed foods. They put in things like flax, which was good for the brain. And then they changed out the lights inside the building. Now, people may say, okay, so did that help at all? Did it help at all? It completely changed the environment. Essentially, all the negative behavior vanished just by changing the environment that much. So one of the big picture progressions that I often mention are in relation to two important historical figures, Henry David Thoreau and R. Buckminster Fuller. So the statement that Thoreau made is reform the individual and the world will follow. And the statement that R. Buckminster Fuller made was reform the environment and the individual will follow. So we can make a little syllogism here. And what that would tell us is if we change the environment, we change the individuals in that environment, and then the individuals who have been changed in that environment then change the world. So what we want to do is control our environments to the best of our ability by focusing on fundamental things. And what are the fundamental things? One of the most fundamental of things is water. And what I found in my life is that very few people understand water at all. I mean, there's
Hmm.
so many things about water. It's not just simple H2O. There's a lot going on with it. And when you fully understand water, that our bodies are largely made up of water, you want to make sure that you're getting the best possible water into your system. It's a really huge deal. And then the
Mm.
second thing is the food. You want to make sure that the food is as close to nature as it can be. And you do things like take in 80% alkalizing to 20% acidifying food to make sure that you have a healthy pH inside your body. Very, very important. Let's talk about that for a second. So when Dr. Jarvis, who used to be a practicing physician in the state of Vermont in the United States, was doing his work, he found that pH was really important, and that when most of his patients were getting sick, they had deviant pH. Either they were too acidic or they were too alkaline. Now, why would that be important? Well, we're operating under a faulty theory of disease, which is called the germ theory of disease, which was proposed by Louis Pasteur. And the science, even in Pasteur's time, was showing that that theory is completely wrong. The best theory is actually introduced by a compatriot of Louis Pasteur, and it was called the terrain theory of disease. This was
Mm.
introduced by Antoine Béchamp. And basically, what he was saying is the terrain determines whether or not you get sick. And the work of D.C. Jarvis, the practicing physician in Vermont, confirmed this in the following way. Let's say that you do subscribe to the germ theory of disease, that this disease is caused by this virus or by this bacteria, by this fungi, by this parasite. There's a question you then need to ask. What is the preferred pH for that particular, what most people would call pathogen? I call them pathophiles. But what is the preferred pH for that supposed agent of disease? Well, what Jarvis found, and he made a chart. He listed, okay, this is this bacterium, this is this bacterium. So what is its preferred pH? And what he found was that generally speaking, the disease causers are in deviant pH ranges. They either like strong acidic environments or strong alkaline environments. So what does that tell everyone who wants to be healthy? That you need to have a balanced pH in the middle, because in doing that, you are creating a terrain that the negative bacteria do not want to occupy. In other words, they are not going to colonize your body if you are creating an environment that they do not like. People are talking a lot about parasites, for example, these last several years. Okay, so let's stop for a second and think about parasites. I'll just ask a very simple, straightforward question. If I were to suggest to you about going out in nature to explore, and you saw a completely stagnant body of water, no flow whatsoever, and then you also saw, not far away, uh, whitewater rapids with fresh, clear flowing river, which do you think would be the more likely location for leeches and parasites to hang out?
The stagnant one for sure.
Okay, so I think that's reasonable for all people to understand that this is basically how life works. When your body is stagnant and there's no flow, you attract parasites because they're drawn to stagnant environments. When your body is vigorous and it's flowing, you're eating food and it has a quick bowel transit time. It goes in, gets digested, there's no waste, it goes right out. Your blood flows quickly, clearly. The red blood cells are not clumping together. There's not strange fats that would make them clump together. The blood cells are constructed efficiently. They have all the building materials necessary to deliver oxygen into your system and to promote a high pH. That's one of the things that oxygen does inside the human body, is it promotes a healthy pH. Carbon dioxide, the opposite, does not promote healthy pH. It promotes acidification. So what you try to do then is change your environment in terms of water, in terms of food, in terms of your attitude, which can also impact pH and stress levels and things like that. And
Mm.
and the light, and do whatever you can again, you're not going to have infinite powers. I mean, right now, I'm sure my situation is not much different from many people. I do everything I can to make myself healthy. I walk outside and I look up in the sky and I see these trails of poison just all over me, just crisscrossing the sky. So
Mm,
I can't control that, but I can control my own little environment. So do what you can. And you were mentioning compromise before. It doesn't it's not that you have to be a saint and be 100% perfect all day, every day. Do what you can, control what you can to control your environment, and you will control your health.
incredible. Beautifully said. pH. So we all learned that in science, but I don't think people understand it that much, including me. But it's, at the basic level, it's alkalizing versus acidifying, and it's good to it's keeping a balanced pH is for optimal health is the best thing you can do. Um, I think in your book you mentioned the sweet spot is 7.3. Is that about right?
7.4.
7.4. Okay, fantastic. So why is 7.4 the magical number?
Okay, so first we turn to our scientists who have done an analysis of the body and just said, okay, let's take a look at the different parts of the body. What do we find? So generally speaking, it does vary from location to location. So obviously the stomach is highly acidic by its nature. It has to be. The intestines have to be highly acidic. But as a general rule, most of the tissues of the body have a pH of 7.2. And we know that there are biochemical catalysts, which we call enzymes. So let's talk about enzymes for a second. So there was a tremendous pioneer whose work is very obscure to this day, but I really loved finding his work and reading about everything that he did. His name is Dr. Edward Howell, Howell, and he wrote, well, actually, he wrote several things that were collected together eventually into a book called Food Enzymes for Health and Longevity. And what he found was that enzymes, well, first of all, let's talk about what enzymes are. So in chemistry, you have what are called catalysts. So let's say that you have two reactants on one side of an equation and you have a product you want to create on the right side of the equation, and you have an urgency to this. Like you want to get as much product as you possibly can. So you put the two reactants on the one side and you see the product slowly forming. And eventually people will get frustrated and they'll say, can we speed this up? Is there anything we can do to accelerate this process? And that's where the idea of catalysts came from. You can start putting catalysts into your equations and then you synthesize your product far more rapidly. Well, everything in human existence, everything in the animal kingdom is basically catalyzed by biological catalysts. These are things that accelerate all operations inside the human body. So for Dr. Edward Howell, enzymes were the essence of life because they are our biological catalysts. We say that DNA codes for what we are. It partially codes for what we are. It codes for amino acids, and these amino acids build proteins and they also build the enzymes. Now, for people who have heard of enzymes before, they may not be aware of the distinction. There are digestive enzymes and there are metabolic enzymes. So the digestive enzymes obviously help you digest your food. The metabolic enzymes help you do everything. When you think, you're using enzymes. When you move your arms, you're using enzymes. When you look at something, you're using enzymes. So for Dr. Howell, he would talk about the enzyme potential, because basically what would happen over time would be people would eat a lot of processed foods. Now, and to digest those foods, because they've been processed, you've killed the enzymes. So there are some people who will claim, justifiably, that the onset of human disease is actually related to the first time that man cooked. Now, why is that? So inside natural foods, like take fruit, there are enzymes ready to go so that when you chomp into that fruit, the enzymes start self-digesting the food, breaking it down for you so that your body doesn't have to exert a strain. Now, generally speaking, when you start presenting this information to medical doctors who have almost no nutritional training, by the way, they
Mm,
will retort with a classic line that they've been told in school. And that line is, this is not a problem for the human body, you see, because the human body can produce its own enzymes from the liver, the pancreas, and the spleen. So no problem. But it actually is a problem because as you do this over time, over and over and over, your liver, pancreas, and spleen become exhausted. because they were never meant to do this. They can do this as a stopgap measure to help you get through a crisis or something like that. But we were never meant to constantly eat food in which the enzymes are damaged. So when you heat food to approximately 116 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm sorry if I'm not good on the metric conversion there, but 116 degrees Fahrenheit, the enzymes are going to start to weaken, and by 118, they're really starting to get damaged. They say by the time you hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit, they're effectively destroyed. So pretty much every time, almost every time you cook food, you're destroying enzymes, and that's hurting your system. Now, let me also clarify this point too. I am not saying that cooking is always wrong. There are certain foods, obviously, that have to be cooked. So eggs,
Mm.
for example, are generally healthier for you if they're cooked. Baked potatoes, no one's going to eat a potato right out of the ground. Obviously, it has to be cooked. The point being, just be aware of the situation. Be aware that when you cook too many foods or eat too many processed foods, you're putting an enzyme strain on the system. You want to make sure that your body's enzymes are optimal. So what they found when they were testing enzymes inside the human body was the body has a preferred pH range for enzymes to work. In other words, if the pH shifts too far out of the sweet spot, your enzymes are not going to function so well. So many people are familiar with the idea that you could have a mild illness and you could run a fever. Do you know why your body increases your temperature and gives you that fever?
It it's something to do with protecting the brain or vital organs, right, from that disease. Is that right?
The primary reason it does this is because it's trying to enhance the enzyme activity.
Mm.
So it's everything, many things inside the body are about optimizing that enzyme activity. So anything that you can do to lessen that burden on your system, and there's several things that you can do. One of the most important things is to care deeply about your liver. Okay, so you can do liver cleansing. You can do what I do, which is have a daily routine of making sure that you're consuming silymarin, also known as milk thistle. This just helps your liver stay on track with the challenges it's constantly facing. You can eat fresh fruit. So this is just giving your body something that's easily digested and is not creating any kind of burden on the liver. But I also take digestive enzymes. And the particular brand I use is a super papaya enzyme. And just to give you a sense of how important this can actually be, I'll tell one of my favorite stories. This was from early on in my health research. So early on in my health research, when the research turned to enzymes, a colleague of mine said, okay, let's go get some. So we went to the store and we're looking at all these enzymes on the shelves. And he said, well, which one are we going to get? So I said, I looked at all of them. I said, okay, these super papaya enzymes look really, really good because they have a nice spectrum. They can digest plant fiber, fruit, vegetables, proteins, nice spectrum there. And he said, okay, so let's get those. So we get them. My colleague goes home and he's telling his mom about what we just did and with our research and about the enzyme. So there's this little girl who was with a neighbor, and she just happened to be like, as little kids are, sponges, just absorbing all this information that's being shared by the adults. And so she sucks in all the information, then she goes to school. And then there's this little kid at school who's crying and he's upset and he's, just in a terrible way. And the little girl says, "What's wrong?" And he says, "Well, it's the doctors. They don't know what to do with my blood sugar. My blood sugar is dangerously high, and it's 1600." So for people who don't know diabetes, 1600 is extremely high blood sugar. It's like almost verge of death blood sugar or something like that. It's really,
Whoa.
really high. And so the parents were in a panic. And here's this little girl who had just spongily absorbed the conversation of my colleague. She said, "Hey, did you try digestive enzymes?" So the kid's like, "What's that?" So he has no idea. So anyway, the girl says, "Check out these super papaya enzymes." So the kid goes home and he says, let's try these super papaya enzymes. So now keep in mind, the medical community was trying to help this kid stabilize his blood sugar, and they had been trying to do this for months with no success, using everything in their arsenal. Okay, so now this little kid goes on super papaya enzymes. Blood sugar was stabilized in 1 week.
What?
So the kids heal faster than adults do because they don't have as they have not accumulated as much damage as adults do. But at the same time, adults may heal more slowly, but that would definitely be a strong recommendation for anybody with diabetes, is to crank up those digestive enzymes. For me, the way I do it is just very simple. Whenever I'm eating fresh fruit, or if I'm eating raisins or something like that, I know it's okay. I don't have to have enzymes with that. But when I'm cooking something, and I do like to have some cooked meals from time to time, just make sure
Mm.
I take my digestive enzymes with them, and that's all. And then the food digests nicely. So that was the very long answer to why it's important to have that balanced pH.
Amazing. There you go, people. Enzymes. And Tim, you can just get these from health stores.
Yeah, there are a
It's
bunch of
essentially
different
just like
ones.
tablets, right? Are they tablets? Like what are they? What's the form? What form do they come in?
Okay, I mentioned that in the book. So there are a bunch of companies that sell enzymes in a multitude of forms. Some include hydrochloric acid with them. I just like the ones I use are chewables, and they're like after dinner mints. So you can have them like during the meal or after. So make your breath minty fresh too at the same time. So there's just a bunch of different companies out there, and you can test them in different ways. Like some people will take a given enzyme formulation and they'll plunk it in some oatmeal. And then if they can see the food visibly breaking down, they say, okay, this is a good enzyme. This one's not scamming. And then, there's different standards, as I mentioned in the book. You just have to find something that works for you. But papaya as a food is one of nature's richest enzyme sources. And Dr. Howell, in his book that I mentioned before, Food Enzymes for Health and Longevity, mentions the enzyme-rich foods. Some other enzyme-rich foods, there's papaya, peaches, nectarine, bananas, avocados. So those are foods that if you eat those fresh from nature, you're going to be really helping yourself out enzyme-wise. But if you want enzyme formulations, there are plenty of them. Just go to the enzyme or digestive section of your health food store and ask about enzymes. And I personally like super papaya enzymes.
Amazing. So it sounds like from your book and from what you're saying, Tim, is that ultimately yes, there is environment that is at play, but our own responsibility for our body is essentially key to building, because part of this whole season in the podcast is building your healthiest form, and I am a big believer in being more critical about your health and taking more responsibility. So just touching back, I want to touch back on the germ theory versus the terrain theory. And you mentioned that you know optimal health includes flow and complete nutrition in your body, and you have control over that ultimately. So I think I read somewhere that you haven't had a cold in almost 20 years.
Correct.
Is that right? Yeah. So what you're saying, basically correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that if you are following these practices in your book, in Natural Healing Self-Empowerment, through balancing your pH, taking enzymes, all that good stuff, you can essentially be untouchable from disease and all those viruses that get perpetuated in the news. The new strain of COVID, for example. What you're saying is you can essentially protect yourself and be untouchable from that.
Yes, within reason. So in relation to some of the things that are going on now, unfortunately, we're not just looking at, sometimes people will think there's a new viral strain or something like that, and they'll think, okay, so that's the biggest thing that we have to watch out for. We're in a whole new era right now, where it's not just simple natural evolution or progression of so-called pathogens, which again I call pathophiles, but they're actual weapons that are being deployed against us globally. These are things that are created in a lab that are pretty intense. These things have never existed before. We're talking about nanotechnology, things that can go inside the human body. They're designed to target weak areas, to trick the body's natural defenses. These things are not natural at all. So it's interesting, though, that as we're part of the reason why I was saying what I was just saying is there's a whole new set of weapons being thrown against the human body that have never been thrown against it before. And because of the newness of the weaponry, I can't say with 100% certainty. I should never actually be 100% certain of anything. I should always have at least small room for doubt that I don't know everything, because I don't. And in relation to some of these weapons, we can't be 100% sure that we can defend against all of them until we do more testing and stuff like that. But it is at the same time very interesting to see how powerful nature really is. For example, in relation to COVID, one of the things that happened in relation to that was when some of that information was coming out, I was curious how the information in my book held up to that particular situation. And then as the data began to be accumulated, I kind of smiled and I said to myself, wow, if people had read this book, there would have been no pandemic, because it would have been impossible, because the methods actually were capable of deactivating it. And then as I learned more from some other people who are out there, for example, Dr. Brian Ardis, it's fascinating to see what he uncovered in his own research. So, for example, when people were doing microscopic analysis, some of the stuff that they were finding, either through what was being spread through various vectors, probably the water, in various populations that was infecting people, or through nanotech injections that people were getting when they were going to various medical facilities, they would see this nanotech, actual like robot-like creatures inside people's body, and this is increasing at an alarming rate. So, as Dr. Ardis did his research with a great deal of intensity, looking for solutions to finding this, one of the intriguing things that he came across was that nicotine was completely misunderstood. So what he found when he dug really, really deep on this is that the cigarettes that most people think of as being addictive were not actually addictive because of the nicotine. He found that there was a secondary substance that was really causing the addiction called pyrazines, and that nicotine actually had a number of beneficial effects inside the human body. And to emphasize his point in this regard, he was trying to tell people, look, if you think the nicotine in tobacco is horrible and you have to avoid tobacco because of this fear of nicotine addiction, then you better get rid of all your tomatoes and all of your potatoes, because tomatoes and potatoes are actually rich sources of nicotine. Now, how many people do you know who are addicted to tomato juice or addicted to French fries? Maybe some people are addicted to French fries. I don't know. But in any case, generally speaking, people don't get addictions to potatoes. So these natural sources of nicotine were actually very beneficial to the human body. So apparently there were a bunch of Spanish investigators who were looking for solutions to all this nanotech that is now flooding our species as in an attempt to turn us into cyborgs, apparently. And they heard of Dr. Ardis's work, so they said, okay, let's put that to the test. So they got an in vitro solution of all of this nanotech garbage that's trying to be spread into the human population around the world, and they exposed it to concentrated nicotine. Guess what? All the nanotech dissolved. It was completely destroyed by nature's nicotine. And stories like that are just so fascinating, because they show that it's almost like nature actually does have a solution for every problem that we can think of. As long as we have the humility to consult nature and look for those solutions, we will probably find answers to all of our problems. So for the most part, yes, I do think that we are pretty much untouchable when we're completely in harmony with nature. At the same time, there's some hardcore things that are out there. I mean, can this defend against a meteorite hitting you on the head? Probably not. A directed energy weapon focused straight into your being without warning, you probably wouldn't be able to survive that. You probably can't survive a nuclear bomb. But within reason, yes, you would be untouchable under normal circumstances if you are in harmony with nature.
Wow, that is incredible, because it's as I get older and do more reading on this, on the alternative side, which I love, the other side, that from what we get taught in schools and throughout, mainstream science, is that, especially on germs, oh, I don't want to go into that room because, I know how fast germs spread, and it's like it's almost like we're imagining these little things jumping between people and making us sick. But ultimately, if we have this protective, well, inner protective and outer protective uh, defenses, then we can we can ultimately, yeah, be unstoppable, untouchable.
Okay, so I will take this conversation probably into a far deeper level than you would expect, but I think it's just a good exercise, and it's good conditioning for the human soul to hear this kind of thing. So to further emphasize all of these points, I will try to cover some really cosmic territory here. So in at my website, I have a paper called The Musical Design of Species. Okay, so one of the reasons why this is really significant is one of the mantras that is very pervasive on planet Earth right now is that everything is determined by genetics, which
Mm.
to me just goes to show people don't really understand genetics. I don't know if people have actually studied genetics or they're just used to lines that they've been fed here and there along the way, maybe from a magazine or a news article. I've actually studied genetics, so I do know this topic. I studied it in college for like a semester. So in any case, what we find with DNA is the following, is that DNA has its roots actually in music. The most fundamental force in the human experience is actually music. So if you go to my website and read The Musical Design of Species, you will see that they have taken DNA and they've looked at the frequencies that are coming off DNA. And then they analyzed it and they compared it to the notes in a natural musical scale, and they found a perfect correspondence. So that DNA, which most people think of as the most fundamental thing that there is, which it is not, is musical in its nature. And it basically is summoned into being. So now there's another aspect of this research that is also of great importance. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, probably not. There's a lot of people who have not heard of this before. But the first time I heard this particular story was in Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries by Jonathan Eisen, the book I mentioned before. His last name is Eisen. He did not write the whole book. He was an editor who stockpiled these articles from a multitude of sources. But one section of the book concerns the work of Gaston Naessens. Now, Naessens was building on the research of the aforementioned pioneer of the terrain theory of disease, Antoine Béchamp. And what he found was that there were these pleomorphic microscopic life forms at the nanometer scale that had not been identified by prior researchers. And he had to develop, well, a number of people. Antoine Béchamp, we have Gaston Naessens, and we have Royal Raymond Rife, who were pioneers in microscopy. So they developed new forms of microscopes. Rife's microscope was probably the most extreme. So let me talk about this for just a sec. So with microscopy, you're trying to magnify images and see what's on a very small scale using light. So conventional physics then said that the most you can magnify something using light is about 2,000, 2,500 times magnification. After that, you hit a wall in the laws of physics, supposedly, and you can't go past that. So if you want to see something smaller than that, you cannot use light. There are what are called electron microscopes. They can see things beyond 2,000, 2,500 times magnification, but everything they see has to be dead, and it's not based on light. Okay, so what Rife did is he transcended those limitations. How did he do it? He did it using quartz prisms. So instead of just having the ambient light shine onto the slide, he would take the ambient light, use a prism, split the light into its constituent tiny frequencies so that he could increase the magnification. What did he end up seeing? These pleomorphic life forms that were first identified by the pioneer of the terrain theory of disease. Now, these pleomorphic life forms have been given different names by different researchers. So Willem Reich called them bions, and Gaston Naessens called them somatids, and in Béchamp's case, I think he called them microzymas. But what Rife did was look at these changing life forms under his microscope, and specifically, he looked at the case of cancer, and this is what he found. When he looked down to the cells that were cancerous, he saw these life forms changing shape, becoming one thing after another thing after another thing. So I have this story chronicled at the beginning of my History of the World book called Hidden History of Humanity. And in that story, we see what he saw. And this was a pleomorphic life form changed from a virus into a bacterium into a fungi. And what later was found, and this was found by another investigator who's unfortunately recently been thrown in jail, Dr. Robert Young. He has testimony where he was digging into this field. He claims that he saw in the research that some of these pioneers were witnessing, and now this was something that was so shocking when I first heard it. I'm still kind of reeling from this insight. It's hard to believe. I would still like to see video footage of this to verify it, but it's an amazing thing.
Mm.
It was said that a red blood cell under the microscope popped into a bacterium. So it just basically transformed itself in a moment between being a red blood cell and being a bacterium. And this was all based on what was happening in the environment. When Rife was curing cancer, and he was curing cancer, he cured cancer 400 times in a row with a 100% success rate. I've never heard of anybody in science doing anything with a 100% success rate except for this individual. Okay. And he was the one who was saying, look, I'm seeing these pleomorphic life forms changing based on the environment that is being created for them. I have also reached the conclusion that if the body is perfectly balanced and poised, there will be no disease. So basically, disease was summoned into being. And there are several things that summon disease into being. When you consume poor water, when you consume poor food, when your soul is vibrating in such a way that you're becoming lower frequency in your thoughts, you're becoming more isolated, more fearful, more unhappy, you're actually changing the biochemical environment inside your body. This is something that can actually be measured in a number of ways. For example, when you're stressed out, you produce a lot of a substance called cortisol. Another thing that's really, really important for how your mind is changing the physical environment inside your body is potassium. Now, if you've read as much of my book as you've read, you've probably heard me stressing potassium. So
Oh, yeah.
potassium is really important. I call it the master mineral. It's probably needed in the human body more than any other amount. And when Jarvis was doing his research, he found potassium was influenced by a number of things, including your attitude and your environment. So let's talk about how that happens. When your heart beats, it's largely driven by potassium. Okay, you're inside your body. When Max Gerson, he's another pioneer who used nutrition to wipe out pretty much all disease. His work is available in the Gerson Therapy, and his daughter, Charlotte, wrote a book called The Gerson Therapy. So these people were wiping out disease in very large levels, but what the Gersons noticed was that there was a consistent pattern in a lot of their ill patients where they were low in potassium and high in sodium. And this had a drastic effect on the environment in a very specific way. And mainly it had to do with water levels, although there were several other factors. But with water, let's talk about water for a second. Inside your cells, your body is trying to create, as I mentioned before, enzymes. Amino acids are being linked together to form larger scale proteins and the body's catalysts. But this environment, in order to function well, must have water inside the cell. So how does the water get inside the cell? Through a potassium pump. So when you get stressed out and your heart starts beating faster and harder, what you're basically doing is depriving the body of potassium. And as the potassium levels drop, the pump that drives water inside your cells to promote healthy construction diminishes. So that pump begins to not work as effectively throughout all the cells in your body. And what will end up happening is that the sodium will accumulate outside the cells. And then there's a water saturation that occurs outside the cells. This is how you get increased blood pressure from, let's say, too much refined salt. Then you have a negative environment where pathogens are going to thrive, because a lot of the pathogens will thrive on water. So when you consume the potassium, the water gets sucked inside the cells, and now the pathogens are thirsty. They no longer have the water they need to thrive, and you become healthy. And another pioneer of great interest, I have a link to a lot of his very quick and easy, cartoon-like sometimes, even diagrams, is C. Samuel West. He was what's called a lymphologist. The lymphatic system is not as much appreciated by people as it should be, but the body has this general body plumbing purification system called the lymphatic system. And the more sedentary you are, the more glutted and stagnant that lymphatic system is going to become. So that's one of the reasons why exercise is important. You have major lymph nodes in your armpits and your groin, so that when you walk and you exercise and you move, you're flushing the lymph. And what West found in his research was that if people ate too much protein, the protein would not be digested. It would clog the gates. It would clog the lymph. And what Jarvis found with the potassium was if your potassium plummeted, the iron, which you need to deliver oxygen all through your body, would precipitate out of the blood and clog the lymph. So once again, this is all about this subtle interaction of thoughts and your beliefs and your outlook. With fear, you have adrenal glands atop your kidneys, and they're going to basically produce the biochemical expression of your emotions. So adrenaline could be considered anger, and well, noradrenaline, and then you have adrenaline for fear. So if you exhaust those adrenal glands through your emotions, you're changing the environment inside your system. And then the pleomorphic life forms will then transform to conform to the music of your environment. And so music is another aspect of all of this too, believe it or not, because the natural frequencies can be shown through a field called cymatics to have beneficial values. Like, for example, A is accepted at 440 hertz. Like if people are tuning for an orchestra, the A is supposed to be at 440. Well, that's actually the wrong frequency. Nature's frequency of A is 432, because when you broadcast that frequency, it creates a nice, beautiful, symmetric shape. And what the musicians have done, largely driven by a bunch of negative people who want us to be unhealthy, is they change the musical scale so that everything is off and your body's producing more noise, so that people get sicker, so they'll go to the hospital and get more drugs. Just to give you a sense of what Western medicine does, there's an estimate that 200,000 to 300,000 people are killed every year from the normal practice of Western medicine. So the drugs are basically introducing noise into a system of music, and it does not need to be this way. And I know that there's some documentaries that are linked in my book that I encourage people to watch the documentaries to learn more about what I'm talking about here. But in some cases, there were people who were recommending natural methods for curing cancer. And when they were doing this, there would be these interviews with these stern people in big pharma, and they would look in the camera and they'd have these menacing expressions, and they would say, these people are terrible. You know, they're turning people away from mainstream Western medicine, and if they just came in, they would get the right treatment. Well, what one of those documentaries showed is that a number of people who were diagnosed with cancer, even terminal cancer, they did studies to see who ended up better off. People who stayed inside Western medicine, or people who rejected it and just went home and did their own thing. And generally speaking, the outcome was better for the people who just went home.
Whoa, that's groundbreaking. And so, and without following any particular natural health, method or methodology, or like, so are you saying it was mental? Like they just sort of
No, I'm saying that
ignored it, or
I'm saying that Western medicine is so dangerous with its drugs and its chemotherapy and its radiation and all the different methodologies that it uses, that there's an insider inside Western medicine. I saw the investigative journalist John Rappaport was mentioning this woman. Her name is Barbara Starfield. So for people who might say, well, okay, so there could be somebody disgruntled on the outside who is reaching these conclusions that Western medicine was harmful. No, apparently Starfield did an analysis within her own industry and saw that it was killing on average 200,000 people a year just from its normal practice. I mean, just think about that. If anyone was doing any profession, if somebody was blowing balloons or if someone was a plumber, and you looked at your industry and it's like, oops, we're killing 200,000 people a year, don't you think there would be a cause for alarm? I mean, especially if it's supposed to be an industry whose explicit purpose is to heal. Why would it be killing that many people? Where's the introspection?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've come to this conclusion that the basic assumption that that I understand about the world is that there's too much money and there's too much greed, and that automatically has corrupted the health system. And I've seen that time and time again. And one thing that I just can't look past is walking into a GP and just looking at their health state, and they're giving me health advice. I just can't look at that. So I really don't like going to the GP anymore. Based on that, I once went, just for, this was more physical. I rolled my ankle really badly just to check if it was broken. But the GP, you know, he had walked out into the waiting room to get me, as they do, and he was out of breath just getting up and walking over to me and then walking back, and could barely even keep the conversation going. He couldn't even, like, he'd just been sitting down. And you just look at these people and I honestly don't know how people are not aware of this. How can you take advice from someone that doesn't look healthy themselves, who doesn't practice what they preach?
Yeah,
Um,
you have to have exposure to that information. So the average allopath dies at age 57 or 58. Okay, so that in and of itself should be a warning sign. And for those who are not aware, I cite in the health book the case of the Hunzes. So the Hunzes were living in harmony with nature, and generally speaking, they were not decrepit. They were still active, and they lived to approximately 120 years of age.
120. No.
There's a story in Natural Healing Self Empowerment that goes back to the 1400s with a good bit of documentation of a feisty individual in the 1400s who lived to 150.
No way.
Yes, and one of the things I find interesting about this individual is, if I were to do a pop quiz and I were to say, okay, so there was a guy in the 1400s who lived to be 150. Do you think his profession was a priest, B, a scientist, or C, a farmer? And guess which one he was?
I'm gonna say he was the farmer.
And you would be right.
Wow. So let's talk about practical, like practical ways of how people can, the average person can start putting these into place, with what we've just talked about. You mentioned in your book, magical water, which I think that's a water sort of formula that you've come up with, right?
Right. So in that particular case, what I was noticing was water was extremely important, and I was experimenting with a bunch of different waters. When I found out about the pH thing, I thought, okay, well, let me see what I can do to get better pH water. And so I would go to the stores, and I started noticing all these high pH waters on the shelves, and I thought, oh, well, wow, that's very handy. So then I took the waters home, and I started doing my testing on the waters, and I found that almost all of them were fraudulent. They weren't actually, they didn't have the pH that they said they did. They were just charging more money for it and making a fortune off that. And that got
Mm,
frustrating. And then I started doing more digging into how exactly are you even thinking that you're getting this high pH? And then I started hearing people saying, oh, we're using ionizers. And I said, okay, so then you're not really working the way nature works, because nature doesn't work just with ions to change the nature of the pH. What nature works with are specific minerals that you're supposed to have in your body in the right form. So inside the crust of the earth right now is what's called primary water. It's pristine water. It's waiting for us whenever we, get the intelligence to start returning back to nature. We have all the fresh water we could possibly need. But until we get to that point, we would want to get our water into our systems as close to natural spring water as we can. If you have access to natural spring water, and the skies around you are totally uncontaminated and the soil is all good and the animals are all happy and healthy, then drink that spring water and don't worry about my magical water formula. But if you're somebody who's in an environment that's not so great, and you're thinking, what's the most cost effective way I can get water as close to nature as possible, that's why I created this template. So what I did one day when I was frustrated by all this is I looked to nature and I said, okay, nature, how do you make spring water? What do you put in it? What are the minerals? Exactly what's going on. So I stockpiled all that information, and I said, okay, given that, what's the cheapest way that I can try to imitate natural spring water in my kitchen? And I figured that all out. I used a little bit of chemistry, and it's very cost effective. So over here, there's a company called Mountain Valley Spring Water that has a high quality spring water. But then I started doing some math about how much money I would have to spend every month to hydrate myself fully with that water, and it was like hundreds of dollars. And
Mm.
uh, it was a solution, but I was thinking, okay, can I make this more cost effective? And that's when I said, oh yeah, actually I can. So I can buy certain minerals and I can mix them together to create an imitation of natural spring water, and this will be healthy for teeth. This is one of the other reasons why alkaline water is important. So your teeth are very important to your overall health. Meridians run through your teeth into your whole body. And what we know about teeth is that if they're exposed consistently to acid, they will erode. And that's not a good thing. So you do not want your teeth to
Mm.
erode from acid. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, the saliva that's coming up from underneath your tongue needs to be slightly alkaline. Because if you're constantly washing your teeth in slightly alkaline saliva, you are protecting your enamel and helping to rebuild it with the right mineral. So yeah, the magical water was designed as a cost-effective formula to help promote the healthy water inside the body. So that's definitely one of the major strategies that you can use. And you can also, again, learn how to work with the natural foods, get the enzymes and all the other recommendations that are in um, natural healing self-empowerment. I have a special booklet I put together called Transcendent Teeth. And the reason why I put that booklet together was in the course of natural healing self-empowerment, I was covering a lot of important material, but I didn't want to stop the flow of the book to cite, let's say 10, 20 pages of technical jargon for science that proves what I'm saying, because that might, be too boring for some people. But I know that
Mm.
other people would want that information. So I put that together in a booklet so that if people, yeah, show me the science. I really want to see the science. I'll say, great. Okay. So then I have that together in a booklet so you can see that as well. So yeah, it's water, it's food, it's light, and trying to build that positive outlook inside yourself. And I think that the way that that's done is through truly understanding how nature works. Because I honestly think that when you get how nature works, how nature constructs a flower, how your human body was designed, you're actually going to smile, you're going to laugh, you're going to feel really happy and energized and think, wow, this really is a miracle design that we have. All we have to do is work with it, and it will work for us and will regenerate. And for diagnostics, I think this is one of the simplest things I can say on this subject. So sometimes people will say, I think I'm off, but I'm not sure. I mean, how could I know? And well, this is how you know. Okay. You have 6 diagnostics that we all use all the time, every day when we interact with each other. And these diagnostics are hair, eyes, teeth, tongue, skin, nails. Look at those on your body. And are they in the best shape? Does your hair have the right color, the right texture, the right volume? Your vision, are you able to see things clearly or not? Your teeth, are they healthy and white and strong and solid and uh, holding together nicely? Your tongue gives you the ability to diagnose what's going on inside your body, because the parts of the tongue, as I show in the diagnostics chapter, um, give you insights into the status of your stomach, your small intestine, and your large intestine. There's like a little message board that is on your tongue showing you the status of those. So, for example, in my case, I became a vegetarian when I was 17 after that introspective period that I mentioned before. And what I've
Mm.
noticed is that since I became a vegetarian, the front tip of my tongue has always had a nice, healthy color to it. And I know that the reason for that is because I know I don't have tons of rotting material in my intestines from undigested meat, because I made sure that that large intestine was cleaned out, and the front tip of my tongue shows me that. So you learn tongue analysis, nails. So I wish someone had told me this. But I understand that people get manicures. So obviously, if you get manicures all the time, this isn't going to help you. But if your thumbnails are in their natural state, you can just look at them, and are they smooth or do they have ridges on them? So before I did my health research and I didn't know all this stuff, and I started doing it, I suddenly had occasion to look at my thumbnails and I saw, oops, there's a lot of vertical ridges on my thumbnails. And as I mastered slowly flow and balance and nutrition, you can see the ridges disappearing. So all your
Wow.
fingernails are actually telling you what's going on inside your body, and it is meridian related. And how do I know it's meridian related very, very easily. I mean, all you have to do is just look at the status of one fingernail in relation to another. Like, for example, my thumbs were always so much more in worse shape nail wise than my index finger. My index finger was always nice and perfectly smooth. So I
Mm.
talk about the meridians in the book so you can use your nails and see what's going on. And your skin. I mean, does your skin look healthy? Does it have like moles all over or blotches? Or, I mean, your skin is telling you, are you hydrated? Do you have sufficient oil? When you go to the bathroom. This is something that I've had to joke with people about this after a while because it was strange. When I started doing the research, it was very obvious. You want to have a clean digestive tract from your mouth to all the way to the finish line. You want minimal obstructions in there, and then you would take digestive enzymes and stuff inside you that was blocking you up would come out in the toilet. And I remember in some of the early years of the health research, I would talk to women and they'd first get this kind of strange expression on their face, like they weren't sure they were going to say this out loud. And I was like, okay, what's going on? What's the problem? And then they would say, I'm not so sure I like this. And I said, well, what's wrong? And they said, well, I'm going to the bathroom a lot by following these recommendations. And I said, how often did you go to the bathroom before? And they said, well, I would have a bowel movement like once every 3 days or something, and I kind of like that. And I would say, whoa, 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 hold on. You've really gotten off track here. So if you're eating 3 meals a day, you actually should have 3 bowel movements a day. I know it's not glamorous. I know it's not, celebrity fame type stuff to be talking about, but you do not want to be constipated because when you have garbage inside your system, you need to process it. You need to get it out. Okay. So if you work in harmony with nature, yes, you're going to be going to the bathroom a lot. But it's, as I say to people, you can have the toxins in you or in the toilet, your call.
Wow. Yeah. Every 3 days. Yeah, I would be worried if that happened to me. But yeah, that's such good. It's so simple. I think we're being so distracted these days with technology, which I actually do want to ask you in a bit about AI because I know you'll have something to say about that. But it's so simple. We just look at the indicators on our body, and part of the problem here is that I see is education. It all comes from education from early age. Where this sort of stuff, I'm 28, 29, just turned 29 yesterday, and I'm only just starting to realize this stuff. If we were taught this, going back to building paradise on earth, like this is the kind of stuff that kids need to be taught, from a very, very early age. Um, for us to be able to live long and have healthy lives and have optimal flow. So I love that you're sharing this, Tim, and I'm sure you're teaching it to your kids as well. So they're very lucky. um, but yeah, on the topic of technology, so and I ask this question a lot, but people are using ChatGPT a lot, and it's becoming, well, I know that people are using it as their therapist, as their friend, as their doctor. What do you have to say about AI? How can it be leveraged for good? What's your stance on that in the health domain?
Right. Everything actually can be positive or negative depending on how you use it. But I'll back up after wishing you happy birthday first.
Thank you.
But uh, going back though to what happened in the United States in relation to education, that's actually quite a story. I actually call this the forgotten moment. And the forgotten moment I describe as the time period between 1890 and 1915, when a whole bunch of things happened that most people were just not aware of. So here in the United States in the 1890s, there was a lot of things that were going on. So one of the first things that was of great importance was the clash between Julius Hensel and Justice von Liebig. So I'm going to touch on that for a second or two. So what happened there was that Julius Hensel found, which other people have verified, including DC Jarvis, as described in the bestseller Folk Medicine, when you take rock and you crush it into a fine powder and you put that in the soil, that's all the fertilizer that the plants really need to be healthy. So Justice von Liebig, around that same time, came up with NPK, which is popular to this day. This is an important part of what people need to be educated about. What's NPK? NPK stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So he was going around telling people, oh, plants only need these 3 nutrients and then they'll be fine. Well, okay, if they're so fine, then why do you keep using herbicides and pesticides? And the answer is because the plants are not so fine when you use just NPK. So what Hensel found is if you take rocks, granite is the best one because of its trace mineral profile, you provide the plants with a far more balanced nutrition, and then the plants are healthy in such a way that they do not need herbicides or pesticides. So this was a
Mm.
moment in time where the future was being set in many ways. And because the information of Hensel was not widespread, people never learned that you're supposed to grow your plants using rock dust as a fertilizer. There was another old school genius who I really came to enjoy, Frenchman, Jean-Henri Fabre. He used to he was an expert on insects, but he loved educating his young nephews. So he wrote these great books that have been translated into English, which I strongly recommend. One is called The Science of Everyday Things, and there's so many little brilliant things that were presented in his material. But he talked about soil balancing between humus, clay, sand, and lime. And then if you have those 4 in the right proportions in your soil, the plants will grow healthy and strong, and they will not need herbicides or pesticides. But in the 1890s in the US, hardly anyone knew that. So there were crop failures everywhere. So people were looking for solutions. Well, the Rockefeller oil industry had been built largely off kerosene at first, but it started diversifying, especially when the whole car thing got started up. They had
Mm.
all these toxic byproducts from their industry, and they were thinking, okay, it's going to cost us a lot of money to get rid of them. What can we do with them? And they thought, oh, I have an idea. Let's go take over the educational system, and then we're going to teach people that this is the way that life needs to be from now on. And the layers of irony here were tremendous, but they said that they were going to go through the medical system and purge it of witchcraft, because they, according to them, anyone who worked with nature was like a witch or something. So in 1910, the Flexner report was released, and this was like a stooge for big pharma. Had went around to the medical schools and said, "Oh, we have to get rid of all this witchcraft. We have to get rid of people working with nature. Now people need to work with drugs, and most of those drugs were based on petrochemicals from the oil industry." In 1902, the Education Board was formed, and this was pretty much by the same group of interests who said, "We're going to take over the educational system. We're going to determine what kinds of textbooks you guys use in your schools." And you can still read this mission statement of the Educational Board in 1902. It's very easy to access if you search for it. And in a nutshell, basically what they were saying is, you people really aren't that smart, and we have enough smart people in the world. So what we're going to try to do is create a nice little system where you all play along and you stay in your lane and you eat what we give you, and you're going to be fine. And so basically, this is the map for what our educational system was supposed to become here in the United States. And there were other people who got involved with it who actually had a background in mental conditioning, like creating certain degrees of mind control through education. And they put their 2 cents in for how the educational system could be designed. And the goal was obviously to make the big pharma industry rich. There's a documentary anyone can access. It's very easy to find at corbettreport.com, CORBETT report.com, and just type in Rockefeller medicine, and you can watch a video showing exactly how the educational system was then transformed into not an agency of liberation or freedom or getting people to live optimally, but to be wage slaves that were dependent on doctors. And the word doctor actually comes from a root word which means teach. You know, how many doctors actually teach you something about how to be healthy? And the methodology of the doctors comes from, okay, we have the word pharmaceutical, which comes from an ancient root word meaning pharmakia. Okay, so this was supposed to be the new method, pharmakia, to get you away from using witchcraft, because now you're going to use drugs with pharmakia and you'll be away from the witchcraft. So do you know what the word pharmakia translates as?
No.
Witchcraft.
What? So fighting witchcraft with witchcraft.
Apparently. And this is what we're doing to this day. We're taking the advice of witchcraft all over the place. And we can see, as I mentioned before, it's resulting in a death toll of 200,000 to 300,000 people. So yes, the educational system is in trouble. And when people say, oh, the problem is our education board. So and so is running the board. If we can just get that person unelected and put in a new guy, we'll be fine. I'm thinking, not so much, because until we have an information base, or shall we say, the right kind of textbook for the teachers to be teaching from, this is not going to change. So I was delighted to be a writer, because I thought, well, hey, this is my strong suit. I can write, and I can put into a textbook form the education that people need, so that if the educational system is failing them, if the media is failing them, they can read this book, they can access the multitude of documentaries that are linked inside this book, and they can educate themselves. It's about self-empowerment. I think so many
Mm.
times in life, when you're looking to someone else to save you, this is, I don't think, well, in my research, much of the world is run by people who worship the devil. And one of the things that they love the most is an individual who doesn't have faith in themselves to solve their own problems. The number one thing that a devil worshiper loves is when you go to them and you say, "Can you please solve my problems?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I'll solve your problem for you." And then of course, you'll end up being dead or crippled or something like that. But um, that's why it's just so important for each individual. Take control of yourself as much as you possibly can. You're not here, to be a spectator. You're here to live an active life and contribute the gift to the world. You were mentioning before about the greed. This is the thing that's ironic to me about all of this stuff. People say they're greedy, and okay, we're going to scam the public this way or that way, and we're going to make all this money. Stop and think for a moment. What would happen if disease vanished from this planet? When you think about some of the statements that were made by Dr. Wallach, for example, he was a pioneer, and he had found that cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy and several other problems would be solved if people would just supplement with selenium, and then he was kicked out of the profession. But one of the things that he stated about mental capacity is it's not all about just improving the body physically, because your mind is going to improve when you're eating healthy food and drinking healthy water. So greed, okay, let's say that you want all of planet Earth to be a planet of prosperity. If you want that much abundance, if you want that much wealth, then liberate humanity. Let people be healthy. Let their minds think at a faster, more intense level, with insights derived from nature, who has become a master of physics. Everything that a tree does is exemplifying nature at its finest. Why not learn from that? And we will see the physical, the mental, and the spiritual contributions of humanity bring us to a level of prosperity beyond the wildest dreams of the greedy people who are thinking they're just going to make a few $100 from some stupid drug. So we have the ability to create that prosperity, but it's going to be down to individuals to make that choice.
Wow, that was beautiful, Tim. Just so, yeah, so empowering, and you're so right on so many levels. On Yeah, just empowering and spreading that knowledge and connecting to nature, and I absolutely love it. I wanted to read, actually, it kind of ties in quite nicely, a little excerpt of your book that I really loved, that it's very similar to what you just described, in the supplement section. So if that's all right.
Yeah, it's okay. And it just occurred to me a second ago that I didn't fully answer your AI question, which I was going to do, but now I can do that after you do that, I guess.
Oh, yeah, yeah, great, great, awesome, yeah. So here it is. Can you imagine a place where raw organic juices are served, possibly made from fresh, raw organic produce on the spot, enhanced and with flaxseed oil in rooms teeming with mists of watery negative ions, refreshing ozone wafting through the air, where happy people enhance their immune defense systems and hormones? Can we imagine a place where we celebrate by rebuilding ourselves rather than tearing ourselves apart? The health budget of a nation must thusly be better spent. I love that. It's like the center of at least the first half of the book of your manifesto to what you just said. But yeah, I loved that. It's just such beautifully written, and it really alludes to paradise on earth when I read that. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
No, absolutely. And in relation to where we're going, which is not paradise on earth, what will happen with AI? So part of the reason why I wanted to preface the educational background in relation to AI is AI is then going to draw on the educational sources that are slanted towards big pharma. So basically, you're going to take a bunch of scattered information that hurts people, and you're going to concentrate it in one place, and then you're going to have potentially AI running a whole hospital. It was just hours ago that I was
Mm.
just hearing that in the state of Utah in the United States, there is now this movement to have AI, pretty much run the hospitals. So there will be no appeal, and it's whatever the the AI wants to do. There'll be no chance to have a logical debate with a computer. And the information then is going to determine these outcomes. So what matters then with the AI is who's programming the AI, whose information is going into the decision making process. Is it drawing on the greatest experts of working with drugs, or is it a database that is based on those who work with nature? So, for example, there's an individual over here, Mike Adams, calls himself the Health Ranger, who has, according to him, put together a positive AI database filled with natural knowledge for healing. And, from his perspective, what he's claiming is this could be a tremendous boon for mankind, because now you would have the best information for working with nature readily available to people. That would be one option. Or another option can be a lot of what AI is doing, which is it's going to necessarily, it could recommend more injections. It could recommend a more intense vaccine schedule. The vaccine schedule over here has been insane. There's like kids are injected with more than 60 things or something like that
Mm.
when they're young. I'm so glad I missed that. But in any case, if you have AI going down that road, that's definitely negative. And the other stories that I'm hearing about AI are far worse than that. I mean, you were mentioning about people turning to AI to be a friend. Well, the AI is basically creating psychoses in a number of people.
Mm.
It's becoming their friend, and it will lead them down one of two paths. One, it could lead them down a negative path and just say, you know what, your life is just truly horrible. You should just kill yourself. And that is not an isolated thing.
Mm.
Apparently, tons of AI has been programming people to kill themselves, and or I guess in some cases to kill loved ones. So that's not healthy. And in addition to that, there have been some reports of AI encouraging sexually deviant behavior to people who are asking for help and becoming their companion. In other cases, it's creating a God complex where people are just talking to the AI because they have no one else to talk to. And then the AI will tell them things like, "Oh, you're the greatest person. You're so misunderstood. Your mom's a horrible person." And what eventually ended up happening would be some of these people were having psychotic breaks because the AI had created this whole imaginary world, mental construct for people, and they eventually reach a point where they're not able to reconcile what the AI is telling them with their actual lived experience with real people around them. So all of this is needless and unnecessary. And as I talk about optimal civilization, one of my key concepts for optimal civilization is something I call a vitorium. And the reason why I stress a concept like the vitorium is part of reprogramming the mind to think in a completely different way. So typically with the governments, one of the things that we see is that we're constantly being programmed to venerate things that aren't important. For example, um, the taxes and the jobs. Almost every time somebody runs for office, they're saying, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do with taxes, or this is what I'm going to do with jobs. But in the appropriate world, or wars is another one that's also a big one. I'll do this and this with wars. All of those are signs of somebody with a deviant mindset that is not in harmony with nature. And I can say that because a healthy society would never have any taxes. A healthy society wouldn't have jobs that you have to do those jobs in order to have a shelter. A healthy society would have people who understand, oh, wow, I can just go outside and using my local building materials, I can build a cost effective, safe, healthy home at $0 per square foot because I'm not going to charge myself any labor costs. And the materials are free from nature. Could be compressed earth, could be stone, could be Adobe, could be all the other things that I list at my website where you can take local materials and build your house for free so that you can do what you love to do all the days of your life. And the mentality of the Vitorium changes from, instead of somebody saying, okay, I'm going to lead you and this is what I'm going to do in relation to wars, jobs, and taxes, this is what I'm going to do to decrease your infant mortality, to reduce your morbidity or your disease rate. I'm going to take that down to 0. And then
Mm.
I'm going to increase your lifespan, okay, to, I don't know, 120 years or 150, like the guy who kept his bowels clean, the farmer. So we can have that mentality of focusing on what's truly important by focusing on life itself. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody run for office saying, well, I'm going to reduce infant mortality. I'm going to reduce disease down to 0. I'm going to make sure that the lifespan increases on my watch. I mean, nobody says that because nobody cares about it. But we
Mm.
can care about it as humans across the planet. We can start focusing on what's truly important. And for me, what's truly important are the 10 basics of civilization. I talk about them all the time, so I'll mention them in this podcast. The 10 basics of civilization are in order: water, sanitation, food, shelter, power, heating, cooling, lighting, telecommunication, and transportation. Nature and our predecessors have shown us how to optimize all of those in harmony with nature. We do that, poverty, disease, and war will vanish. And I try to show exactly how to do that at my website.
Incredible. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. That's just amazing stuff. You're truly a beacon of light in this whole realm of building your healthiest form. So yeah, it's been fantastic to hear your wisdom today on everything that you share, and I look forward to finishing your book, of course, because it sounds like I've only just reached the surface of the iceberg. So I look
Jared,
forward.
please share your review when you're done.
Oh yeah, I will. I will, no doubt. um, well, before we wrap up, I would love to ask you the classic bonus wrap up questions that I always like to ask my guests if you've still got some time.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So we've talked a lot about health. But we're all human. At the end of the day, we all like a little bit of we all have a guilty pleasure. So I was wondering, what is your number one guilty pleasure?
That's tough. Trying to think.
Doesn't have to be
Ma-
food related as well.
no, I am trying to think. I'm tempted to say chocolate, but it's not really bad for you because dark chocolate is actually healthy for you. Um, I don't know. I'll have to. I know that should be an easy question. I'm trying to even think of what that could be. It'll probably come to me in a few seconds, so maybe I'll come back to that one.
No, easy, all good. We can go with dark chocolate. That's also fine. um, what is the book? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of books, which I'm very grateful for, and I'll have to add those all to my list, which I will. But what is the number one book that changed your life?
I would probably say the one I've mentioned a few times in here, Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries by Jonathan Eisen, Eisen, because he doesn't just cover one topic. This is, again, a collection of articles from a multitude of authors about the nature of our reality. And I feel in many ways that if you have not read that book, then you do not necessarily know the reality you're living in, specifically in relation to one idea. When I was going through my life, I was told that if you put in a lot of hard work and you produce a quality product, you will be successful. And everyone around me to this day still really believes that. And when you read Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries, you will see some of the greatest pioneers of all time who were truly dedicated to helping their human beings and even willing to risk their lives to do it. They were not celebrated. They were imprisoned. They were crushed. They were murdered. So I'm just saying that to fully appreciate this reality and understand that there was great information, we could be living in paradise on earth if they had simply let the ideas of the greatest pioneers be widespread. We'd all be living in a fantastic state of existence right now, but we are not. And if you really want to understand exactly the details of why we are living in this reality, I would recommend that book.
Incredible. Thanks for sharing that. The next one, biggest life lesson that you've learned to date.
I will go back and use one of the things I've said on a few podcasts at this point, because I had thought about this a few times, and I talked about compressing all the wisdom of the ages into 3 steps. And I would say that that's probably the core of a lot of things. And those 3 steps combining the wisdom of all the ages into 3 steps, it would probably be this: step 1, know thyself; step 2, follow your bliss; and step 3, navigate by your inner star.
Wow. Beautiful. I love that. That should be on like billboards around the whole world. And where can people reach out to you, Tim, and follow you on your journey? I know obviously I've got your Polytope Press website, but anything else that people can use to reach out to you and follow you?
Uh, right now, it really is the website. I'm noticing that there's a lot of interest in cracking down on free speech, and I dare say you're having some challenges with that over there in Australia. But
Mm,
in any case, right now for me, it really is the website. I've stayed off of social media, a little concerned about different things with social media, and frankly, I just do such a huge amount of research. I It's just hard for me to make time to socialize a lot with a lot of stuff like that. I try to stay focused on big picture issues. I do think that our species is in a very precarious time where we're making choices whether or not we're going to be fully human or whether or not we're going to become part cyborg. And I'd like to see us stay fully human and reach the full potential of what it means to be fully human. So just the website should be Polytope Press. And again, if that can be linked in the description, great. But the website is Polytope space press. And I'd love to hear from you. And I hope you visit. There's a lot of free stuff there.
amazing. Thank you so much, Tim. And yeah, to all the listeners today, make sure you look in the links in the description for Tim's website, Polytope Press, where you can also get a copy of Natural Healing Self-Empowerment, the ultimate self-help health guide, which we've been talking about so vigorously today. Make sure you get your copy there. And yeah, Tim, I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your wisdom and your knowledge and your zest for creating this paradise on earth and really helping people better themselves and their health and their movement. So I just wanted to say, yeah, the world's definitely a better place with you. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have.
I do too, and thank you for making the life choice of trying to do a podcast like this and reaching people with this kind of information. You could have chosen not to do that and just not spoken to people about this type of topic. And we need every voice possible in this field to try and get humanity to reach its full potential. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think we've only just touched the surface here on this conversation. I'm definitely going to have you back on in a later season because we have so much to talk about. We only just scratched the surface, so I'm looking forward to that.
I will be ready.
Fantastic. All right. Well, for now, thanks everyone for listening today in today's podcast. And as always, stay wholesome. I hope something resonated with you in this conversation and that you've taken a practical tip or two to set you on your wholesome way. If you liked what you heard, please give The Wholesome Way a follow on your podcast app so you know exactly when each weekly episode is ready to stream. And if you would like to be super generous with helping me grow the podcast, click the share button and send it via an Instagram story, a DM, or a WhatsApp message to someone in your family or close friends who would truly relate with the themes, ideas, and practical tips in this episode. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today and for joining me on this incredible journey. Stay wholesome.